Hi there. In this video, I'll show you the right way to set up a slider with an overflow effect in Bricks Builder. I go over the process of setting up a basic slider and adjusting it for responsiveness. Then we do the magic. You see, it can make for a more intuitive experience because the peak suggests to the user that there's more to be seen if they just slide horizontally. If you prefer to skip to the meat of the tutorial, you can use the timestamps. Let's get into it. First, I'm going to take a moment to set up a simple nestable slider. Then we can begin to customize from there. So I'll add in a section, and inside that section, the section container, I'll add in the nestable slider. I'll also do a bit of cleanup, so we'll remove everything that we don't need here. Now I'm going to add in a simple blog post card, which I already created. So I'll go into templates and insert. Make sure the blog card is inside slide 1. You'll also notice that my blog card comes with a query loop, which I don't need because what I want to multiply is the slide, not the blog card inside the slides, if you get what I mean. So I'll select slide 1, turn on the query loop, and just set up a simple post query loop, which is already in place. We already have 10 posts per page, so we can go with that. I also want to get rid of this spacing here with the padding that's going on there. So I'll select the blog card and get rid of the padding. Now, when I go into the slider settings, I'll set the number of items to show to 3. One more thing I'll do is set the height to fit content so that we have all the slides equal in height. And I'll save and we can preview on the front end. So yeah, it's looking nice so far, except that I need to add in a gap and also modify it for other breakpoints. So I'm just giving this the basic treatment as we would for any typical slider. So I'll go into spacing and I'll use an ACSS variable here for the spacing. So I'll use the content gap variable. Then for smaller breakpoints, I'll go into mobile landscape and set the number of slides to show to 2. And finally, the smallest breakpoint will be 1. Now we should have a workable slider. Also in smaller breakpoints, you can see it drops to 2 slides. Finally, 1 slide. So far, everything seems to be working exactly as we want. Now, what if I want to make sure the next slide kind of peeks in through? Now, what if I want the next slide to peek here? Now, I've seen people come here and change this to a fractional value. So maybe set this to 3.5. Okay, I have my slide set to loop. So let me come back up here and set the slide type to slide. So we have a finite number of slides, and then this problem should become more obvious. So now you see that I cannot slide anymore. It's basically, I have to fight with the slider to make it do what I want it to do. And that's because it's not the right direction to go with this kind of value. So always remember this field items to show should have a single whole number, not a fractional unit. Now, the right way to accomplish this is the padding setting. Unfortunately, the slider padding is not a part of the options listed here on the interface. Now, when I talk about padding, do not mistake it for the padding you get here. This is general CSS styling. We're talking about the slider settings, which is why we have to now switch to custom settings. So I'll come here to options type and set this to custom. And before I click save, I'm going to come back here and inspect our slider. Now, if you've watched my other videos on creating sliders of any sort, you should already be familiar with this step. So I'll copy this, the contents of data split, and do a little bit of cleanup. So I'll replace this and quote entity here with the regular double quotes. Then we'll put it in a JSON formatter. Now this is what we'll use in our custom options. Paste this here. Now straight up, you can see why we are getting some kind of glitch with the breakpoints, because Bricks added this 1279, which is our largest breakpoint, which we don't need, because on the largest breakpoint, these settings up here should suffice. We should only have breakpoints specified for the lower options. So right away, I'll clear out this 1279 breakpoint. The way we know it works is that everything, the slider returns back to normal, just like we didn't change anything up here. Then I'll save. And you'll notice at the beginning of this video, I went ahead and added some of these settings using the options. That's kind of sets the tone for what we can do with the custom options. So that way we are not necessarily starting from scratch. You already have some options already in place that you can then edit and add to. So it's always a good idea to set up some of these options, especially breakpoint options, with the default options, and then switch to custom when you need more control. Now, I'm going to add in the padding rule. To do that, I'll place my cursor somewhere here and add padding. Now, the padding rule, the padding property takes any valid CSS value for sizing or scale. So in this case, I'm going to do a padding of like 10 rem. If you'd like to read more about the padding property, you can read it in the Split documentation. So we have padding here, and you see it can take a simple whole number, which is automatically interpreted in pixels. It can also take any value of CSS format, but you have to put it in quotes. Now, whatever value we put here, especially when we use a single value, it gets applied both for left and right, which you see in demonstration now. So add padding and add a comma there since it's among the list of settings. Now, when I save, as it refreshes, you can already see it play out here. We have this weird spacing on the left and also the same exact spaces on the right, except that we also can now see the next slider peeking through. The problem now is that it seems like the slides are also pushed right. Now, this would not be a problem if you had set your slide type to loop. And when we set it to loop, then a previous slide can fill up this space, and it's not so obvious that there's that weird spacing going on there. So if this is the look you are going for, then you are good to go and it's perfect. But what if we want it to peak only on the right, but not on the left? This is where the extra settings for padding comes in. So we can also specify more granular controls for the padding for either the left or the right padding. So I'll come here, and for the padding settings, instead of a single value, I'll come here and add a curly bracket. Now I'll say left. So I'll set the left padding to 0 rem and the right padding and I'll set the right padding to 10 rem. Now it seems there's something wrong here. Let's see. Okay. So I don't need these quotes when I'm using curly brackets. So I'll remove the quotes. Now you can see it's aligned flush with the left side of this invisible padding. But on the right side, you can see the extra slide now peeks through with a distance of 10 rem. So as I slide across, you can see no matter where we are on the number of slides, you have this extra slide peeking through. Now with this setup, you can conveniently set your slide type to slide or fade, whatever the case may be. In this case, I like slide because it gives us that sliding effect, which is the whole point of a slider anyway. And you can see we have this extra one here. And when we arrive at the last slide, it simply stops right there. So this can be an effect that is satisfactory. And I especially love it with smaller devices. So let's see how it looks on smaller screens. If you haven't already, check out my multi-level header menu template for Bricks Builder. It's designed to provide a robust starting point in creating a simple yet powerful header menu relatively quickly. The template also includes a CSS style sheet where I've curated all the most important styling options in one place, so you don't have to go hunting around the Bricks user interface to have a header menu that looks and feels exactly how you would want. My favorite feature by far is that it offers a true multi-level experience on mobile, making content easily accessible without overwhelming your users. Plus, you can replace the boring old toggle icon with something more delightful. You can purchase the multi-level header template at the link in the description below. Let's get back to it. Now, what if we want a situation where the right side of this whole slider viewport extends fully to the edge of the screen? For this, we'll need a few lines of CSS. So let's explore this in the inspector, and then we'll look at how we can implement this in Bricks. Now, when we inspect this, we have the section, the container, the slider wrapper, and the split track. Now, this split track is the part that truly controls the viewport or the window through which we can see the contents of the slide. And you can already see the slide, the main slide window shows from here to here. And then the padding, which is highlighted in green, is indicated on this edge. So what if we could remove all of these and make it extend from edge to edge without any clipping? We can see under the split track class that there's this option here for overflow, which is by default set to hidden. So if we switch this to visible, you see now everything extends to the edge. And even as we drag the slider, even the next slides, everything just flows from right to left. But another problem now as a consequence of making everything visible is that we have this horizontal scroll bar, which is not something we desire. So we'll have to hide or contain this slider inside the section, the parent section. So we'll have to come back up here to the section container and add an overflow hidden property there. Now, when we do that, you notice the horizontal scroll bar goes away and we have this slider free to flow from left to right, which looks even nicer on mobile devices because now you have this kind of slider that flows from left to right. Now, I'm going to show you the right way to implement this in Bricks because whatever I just showed you here was mainly for an example, but it's going to wreck things if you have multiple sliders on the page and you don't necessarily want them to look and behave the same way. So I'll come back here into Bricks and we'll make sure the slider nestable is selected. Now I'll come here and in the CSS panel, under CSS classes, I'm going to add a custom class. Now this field is mostly useful for when you need to add a class simply for identification purposes. Of course, you can also target the class from any CSS style sheet or even in the custom CSS bar, but it's mainly useful when you do not want to have to add a new class up here and then save it into your website's database. So I'm going to come here and just add in a new class. I'll call this overflow slider right. So first I'll add in the overflow slider right. And under overflow slider right, which is the main class of the slider, we'll now have split track. So this will target the actual track of the slide, but only when we have this class implemented or present down here. I'll come here and set overflow to visible. Now when I refresh, you should see that effect already taking place. However, we still have to deal with this horizontal scroll bar. So I'll come right here to the section under layout, overflow to hidden, and save. And now we have the slides flowing from left to right. Now, one more thing I would like to show you is what if you also are in a situation where you'd like to prevent this part of the slides from being visible on screen while we slide. So you want this to extend to the edge of the screen, but we want this here to kind of be hidden as it flows from left to right. Of course, we cannot achieve that by simply using the overflow property. The way to approach this will be to use the clip path property. So I'll show you how it works. We'll come back here in the custom CSS panel, and I'll add still under the split track item, I'll add a clip path property. I'll be using insert, and then we'll place a list of values here for top, right, bottom, and left. So what this does basically is draw a path, a clip path around here. Now, based on the specifications we have here, the top will be at 0, but then the right will extend as far as minus 100 view width. So which would be as wide as the screen would be, the viewport would be. Then the bottom, of course, will be 0 again, and then the right will be 0. Now, what this would do is set something like a mask around the slider, which would then hide this portion, but extend this portion as wide as we want it to go. And I'm going to demonstrate how these values work practically in the inspector, but let's slide. And now you can see that this side of the slider viewport is hidden as we slide along. Now, you might wonder, okay, why 100 view width? Let's extend this. So imagine maybe you are viewing this on a really wide screen. You can see how it ends here, but keeps flowing here from left to right. Now, if we were to use a lower value here, or maybe a higher value in this case, since it's a negative number. So let's keep going as I count up to 60 view width, or towards 0. You can now see how it begins to extend backwards down to 0 view width, which is the situation where we started, in which case we do not need the overflow slider anymore. So it's always a good practice to just set this to minus 100 view width in this case. So far, that's how we can achieve this sort of slider effect. While we're still on the subject of sliders, you can further boost the user experience by adding navigation arrows somewhere at the top or bottom of the slider without obstructing the fanciness you have going on here. Check out my video on how to create custom slider controls for the nestable slider in Bricks. If you'd like to hire me to build you a new website or for general consultations, feel free to drop a message or schedule a meeting on my website linked in the description below. I'll see you in the next one.